Lower Mumford 283. Tallulah speaking.
Tallulah, this is Peter Wise. How are you?
In her excitement, the duster fell from Tallulah's paw. Oh, what a surprise! I'm very well, thank you. Country air seems to agree with me. Peter Wise's voice came crackling down the line from London.
I mustn't talk long. I'll save all the news for you when I see you. That's really why I'm phoning. Mum and Dad have invited you to stay with us over Christmas. You will be able to come, won't you?
Oh, said Tallulah, there's nothing I'd like better.
We'll expect you on Christmas Eve, then. Goodbye.
Goodbye, Peter. Tallulah replaced the receiver, picked up her duster, and began humming to herself. Oh, how nice it would be to see her friends again. Peter, Mr. and Mrs. Wise, and of course the two cats, Roger and Beatrice. Presents, thought Tallulah. I shall have to go up to London early on Christmas Eve and choose something for each of them at Hamble and Borringe. The days passed quickly, and the morning of Christmas Eve was clear and frosty. Tallulah carried her suitcase to the front door and took a last satisfied look round the cottage parlour. Everything was spick and span. The furniture smelled sweetly of lavender polish. There was a white dust sheet over the sofa, and you could see your face in the gleaming copper kettle on the hearth. She closed the door firmly behind her, gave one last rub to the brass plate, which read, Tallulah, vocal tuition by appointment, and popped the latchkey under a stone frog that squatted by the step. 2 hours later, the train from Lower Mumford pulled into Victoria Station. Tallulah made straight for the taxi rank, and as she waited in the queue, she happened to notice the headline in the paper of an old man standing next to her. Cat burglars strike again. Nationwide hunt. Police admit bafflement. After a while, Tallulah's turn came, and a shiny black taxi squealed to a halt beside her. "Where to, miss?" asked the cabby. Hamble and Borringe, please," said Tallulah. She sank back on the comfortable leather seat. "Righto, miss," said the driver. Hamble and Borringe was swarming with last-minute Christmas shoppers. Tallulah had to be careful not to be trampled underfoot, as she stood there trying to make up her mind which department to visit first. Perhaps I'll start with the toys, she thought. I should be able to find something there for Peter. Tallulah really enjoyed herself in the toy department. She visited Father Christmas twice, took a sleigh ride into the fairy grotto, and tried her luck in the bran tub, where she fished out a plastic imitation diamond bracelet. Well, I like it anyway, she thought, admiring herself in a mirror. Oh, but I really must buy some presents. The shop closes at 1. Next, she visited the perfume department, where the girl assistants sprayed the back of her paws with samples of every scent they had in stock. Then she spent some time in Pet's Corner, chatting with a much-travelled boa constrictor. "Oh, my goodness, it's 20 to 1, cried Tallulah, "and I haven't bought a single present. Oh, dear, I wonder what they'd like."
Food, gulped the boa constrictor. Food is always acceptable. In fact, I'm feeling decidedly peckish myself.
"I think I'd better get a move on," said Tallulah hurriedly. "It's been nice meeting you."
"And it would have been nice eating you,"
said the boa constrictor sadly, when she was out of earshot. The great food hall at Hamble and Borringe occupied almost the whole of the ground floor. There was a poultry counter, groaning with row upon row of plump birds plucked and ready for the oven, and on the marble fish slabs, laid out on a bed of crushed ice, were the most splendid arrangements of turbot, plaice, halibut, mackerel, and Dover soles, glistening in the spray from a small fountain. Tallulah gave a sigh. There seemed so much of everything she didn't know where to begin. "Does Madam require any help?" said a voice from just behind her. It was a tall, rather pale young assistant, dressed in black striped trousers and tails. I don't know," said Tallulah. "I'm staying with a family over Christmas, and I must find some suitable presents before you close." "Yes, it is a worry, isn't it?" agreed the assistant. He brushed aside a lank strand of blonde hair. "Now then, let's see what I can come up with. I know. I've got it. A hamper. A hamper will solve all our problems." He pointed a thin finger at a row of wicker baskets of varying sizes. Tallulah selected a medium-sized one. "Lovely," said the assistant. "Now all we need to do is to fill it. Let's have a look, shall we?" "Madam, may I offer you some Dundee cake or a lobster stew, or possibly some pickles from Peru? Or maybe you would like to try some kangaroo tail soup, and why not sample some tea from Timbuktu? I've mangoes from Mandalay and shadroe from Siam, and oranges flown in today from Spain. Oh yes. I've mushrooms that were picked at dawn not far from Kathmandu, and Russian plums still wet with Russian rain. Tavares. Madam, may I introduce our freshly fattened Christmas goose, or could you be tempted by a turkey? And then again I recommend some clotted cream brought from Land's End, and blueberry pie from Albuquerque, no less. There's snails direct from Singapore, and honey from Hong Kong, and grapes grown in the valley of the Rhine. There's frog's legs from Finisterre, and port from Portugal, and bird's nest soup, they tell me, tastes divine. If Madam's feeling specially bold, then this display remains unsold, and maybe something here will take her fancy. There's chocolate ants and cream of rattlesnake, and curried goat and hippopotamus steak. There's hedgehog sauce and pate porcupine. There's ostrich eggs and octopus in brine. There's monkey mousse and sunflower juice. There's cinnamon spread and nutmeg bread. There's a winkle whip and a crocodile dip. Would you care to taste our caterpillar paste? And here's a treat. Oh, madam, do take a seat. "Oh, dear," gasped Tallulah. "I've never known shopping to be so exhausting. Do you think I could leave the choice to you?" "Well, of course," said the assistant. Soon he was running from one end of the food hall to the other, stopping only to toss items he had selected into the hamper. Tallulah began to grow dizzy watching. "I suppose I ought to give him a hand," she thought. "Now I wonder what those are up there." A shelf, supporting a pyramid of curiously shaped bottles, attracted her attention. She jumped up to take a closer look. "Peaches in heavy syrup," she read, turning one of the lower bottles with her paw. "Oh, that sounds delicious. I'll take one of those." Without thinking, she pulled the bottle towards her. The top bottle struck her first, on the head, knocking her unconscious and sending her flying backwards. Tallulah landed with a thud in a particularly large, half-filled hamper. She was followed by the rest of the collapsing pyramid, and then the hamper lid snapped shut. "There we are," said the assistant, bustling up with a few last packages. "That'll stop the tummy rumbles, won't it? Oh, goodness, where's she gone? Fancy putting me to all this trouble and then hopping it. Well, really." He stood, one hand on his hip, glaring angrily around him as the bells rang for closing time. "Any more to go, Mr. Shankshaft?" called Fred the carrier as he approached with his trolley. "Oh, there's just the big one for Scotland. Now don't you go dropping it." "That's funny," he thought to himself when Fred had gone. "I don't remember closing that hamper. Never mind, I must have. Oh, it's that cat. She's got me all of a fluster." Tallulah opened one eye. It was pitch dark, and her head ached terribly. Everything about her seemed to be rattling and swaying, and from far away she thought she heard a muffled engine whistle. The smell of wicker brought the food hall in Hamble and Borringe painfully back to her, and when she felt the cold glass of one of the fruit bottles next to her, she realized what must have happened. Tallulah tried a few feeble cries for help, but the hamper was extremely solid, and the lid was impossible to open from inside. "Oh dear, wherever are they sending me?" she wondered. Since there was no one to answer that question, and a nasty bruise was developing rapidly on the back of her head, Tallulah thought she might as well go back to sleep. The express train, carrying the hamper and Tallulah, sped north through the night. From time to time, in the midst of confused and jolted dreams, Tallulah thought she heard snatches of conversation. "This one's out at Waverley," and "Do you ken what's in it?" and "I wouldn't mind a wee bitey myself." Finally the train stopped, and Tallulah felt a little queasy as the hamper was unloaded, carried some distance, and banged onto the floor of a waiting van. Then they were off, and Tallulah lost all sense of time as the van droned on its way. The next thing she remembered was the hamper being pulled and pushed amidst a babble of excited voices. "Oh, let's have it. I'm half-starved."
"I've fetched it. I'll open it."
"Will you all be quiet?" came a woman's voice. "If you don't take your fingers out of my road, I'll have them off with this knife. Now will you just let me get at the string?" "Nellie's quite right," came a softer voice. "Have a little patience, boys, and there will be plenty for everyone." There was the sound of string being cut, and the catch being unfastened, and the lid of the hamper flew open. Daylight flooded in, and Tallulah blinked as she stared up into the wrinkled face of an old woman brandishing a carving knife. "Good grief, what's this then? They haven't plucked the turkey."
"That ain't no turkey,"
said the man with the gruff voice, looking into the basket.
"That's a muggy."
"Would you help me out, please?" said Tallulah. "I have had a rather trying journey." The soft-voiced man, who, Tallulah could now see, had iron-grey hair and was wearing a green silk smoking jacket, said, "Boy, Croker, jump to it. Help the lady now." Croker, the man with the gruff voice, was huge, and wore a flat cap pulled down over his fat red face. The boy had close-cropped hair and was thin and rather spotty. Each of them took hold of one of Tallulah's paws and pulled her, none too gently, out of the hamper. Tallulah looked around her. She was standing on the stone floor of a farmhouse kitchen in front of a blazing log fire. The old woman, the two men, and the boy were regarding her with considerable interest. The man in the smoking jacket gave a short laugh. "I don't remember including you in my order from Hamble and Borringe. The name's Machette, by the way." "Do you think she's cobbled up the turkey?" said the boy. He started to rummage in the hamper. Tallulah looked indignant. "I haven't gobbled up anything. As a matter of fact, I'm feeling extremely hungry." She turned to Mr. Machette. "And as for being part of your order, I assure you I am just as surprised as you are." She touched the bump on the back of her head, gingerly. It's all the result of a most unfortunate accident. I was on my way to spend Christmas with some friends in London. Oh, they must be wondering where on earth I am. Do you think I might use your telephone?" The men exchanged glances. Yes, of course you could, said Mr. Machette quickly. Only there's been a very heavy snowfall, you see, and the line from the valley is down. But I've no doubt they'll soon have it fixed. Through a small latticed window, Tallulah glimpsed a bleak, white, hilly landscape with no other houses in sight. Am I very far from London? Tallulah asked. Nellie cackled with laughter. Well, a good way, said Mr. Machette. You're in Scotland. Scotland? Oh, then I must leave immediately. There was a further exchange of glances, and Croker muttered something under his breath to Mr. Machette. Leave? Oh, no. No, we couldn't let you do that in this weather. And besides, there's no trains today. No, you must be our guest. The very least we can do after your unpleasant ordeal is to offer you the hospitality of Fairmile Farm. Oh, well, that's very kind of you. But you see, my friends, the Wises, are expecting me. They'll think I've been murdered or kidnapped. I'd better let the local police know I'm still alive. Croker planted himself in front of her.
We'll send a boy. He'll see to it. You just follow me, miss. I'll show you your room.
He led the way up a broad staircase and along a windowless corridor.
Here you are.
He showed her into a small but comfortable bedroom.
Make yourself at home.
Tallulah sat on the bed and gazed out of the window. Oh, dear. Well, I suppose at least I'm having a white Christmas, she thought.
When you're away, thinking of home, all that you've left far behind you, faces you know from long ago, crowd into your mind and make you sad, trying to smile, thinking of home and of the miles that divide you. How sweet it seems in your daydreams, thinking of the way it was back home. I don't long for castles or for palaces, just my own front door. A house where warmth and life and happiness is. Who could ask for more? How sweet it seems
She must have fallen asleep, for the next thing she knew, there was a knock on the door. It was the boy.
I thought you was hungry. Dinner's ready.
What did the police say? Asked Tallulah as they went downstairs.
Oh, yes, the police. Oh, well, that's all taken care of, isn't it? They said they'd see to it directly.
In the kitchen, the table was laid with a white linen cloth, shining glasses, and silver cutlery. Croker was piling logs on the fire, Nellie was busy at the stove, and Mr. Machette was opening some very dusty wine bottles. "Ah, yes," he said, pulling out a cork with a pop. "Our guest of honour. Come and sit by the fire. Mrs. Girdlestone has prepared a real banquet for us, haven't you, Nellie?"
I do my best,
said Nellie Girdlestone dourly. Very soon the fine wine was flowing freely, and the turkey all but finished. Crackers were pulled, and even Croker agreed to exchange his flat cap for a paper crown. "A farmer's life must be such hard work," said Tallulah, putting down her knife and fork. "What's that?" asked Mr. Machette. Farming. You do all live off the land." The boy sniggered.
Ha! Well, you could put it that way, yeah. Ha! Ha!
"Good yeoman stock. You know, dairy farming, pigs, sheep, crops, the lot," said Mr. Machette.
We plough the fields and scatter,
said Croker. "Oh, yes, yes. That was delicious, Mrs. Girdlestone," said Tallulah tactfully.
Aye, well, there's not much left,
said Nellie glumly.
What am I supposed to give the other gentleman if he ever gets here?
Yeah. When is this froggy arriving?
asked Croker. Frog, thought Tallulah, and for a moment she recalled leaving her latchkey in its hiding place yesterday morning. What a long time ago it seemed. "I should explain," said Mr. Machette. "We're expecting this foreign, consultant. Frenchman, actually. A Monsieur Dupoisson." He glanced at his watch. "In fact, he should have arrived several hours ago." Just then the telephone rang in the hall. "Oh, good," said Tallulah excitedly. "They must have fixed the line. Now I'll be able to get through to London." Mr. Machette jumped up to answer the phone. He spoke in a low voice, but Tallulah could not help overhearing some of what he said. "I want it fixed. Look, no slip-ups this time. Look, we can't hold out here much longer. They'll be on our tail." There was an angry note in his voice as he went on. "You'll do it my way, if you know what's best for you." When he came back, he slammed the door after him. "The fools," he said to Croker. Then suddenly remembering Tallulah was present, he went on, "Oh, that was the telephone engineers. They're just testing. They say they've got serious problems, and they won't be ready," he glanced meaningfully at Croker, "for several days." "Oh, what a nuisance," said Tallulah. "I'll just have to catch the first train tomorrow." But the two men were talking urgently in low tones and seemed not to hear her. "Oh, well, I think I'll make an early night of it." Tallulah started to climb the wide staircase. "Thank you again. See you in the morning." But there was no reply. There was a cry of alarm, the hysterical quacking of ducks, and the sound of cracking ice. Tallulah was immediately wide awake, although it took her a second or two to remember where she was. Further desperate cries reached her ears. "Help! Help! Oh, mon Dieu! Aidez-moi! Help me! Au secours! Au secours! Somebody! Anybody!" Tallulah ran to the window and pulled back the curtain. There was a duck pond on the far side of the yard, and in the dim light of dawn she could just make out the signs of some sort of disturbance. "Au secours! I can't swim! I can't swim!" came the voice again. Two figures came hurrying out of the farmhouse. It was Croker and the boy, carrying a ladder. It's the Frenchman, thought Tallulah. He must have gone straight through the ice. Oh, I hope he doesn't drown. Fortunately, the pond was not deep, and in a few minutes, Croaker and the boy had managed to pull a bedraggled figure and the twisted remains of a bicycle from the centre of the pond. Oh, thank you. Oh, merci beaucoup. Oh, yes. Oh. The sky was brightening, and as the trio approached the farmhouse, Tallulah could clearly make out the features of a dripping brown tomcat, wearing a sodden beret over one ear and a string of onions round his neck, like a muffler. No doubt about that. It must be Monsieur Dupoisson. And yet, the face and even the voice, despite its foreign accent, seemed strangely familiar. Tallulah's curiosity was aroused. I think I'd like to meet Monsieur Dupoisson, she decided. She quickly made her bed and had just reached the top of the staircase when she stopped and looked through the banisters. There was Monsieur Dupoisson, wrapped in a huge towel, seated on a milking stool, with his paws in a steaming mustard bath, and Mr. Machette, in a dressing gown, was standing with his back to the fire. Well, Dupoisson, it was certainly a dramatic entrance. You must have woken the entire neighbourhood. Anyway, I'm glad to see you at last. We've heard of your reputation in the south of France. Let's hope you do as well for us. I'll try to do my best, said Monsieur Dupoisson, his teeth chattering. But tell me, why the bicycle and the onions? Just one of my innumerable disguises, said Monsieur Dupoisson. When do I start? I have a job for you this afternoon. However, there is one small problem that I didn't bargain for. She arrived in a hamper yesterday. Her name is... Tallulah! Cried Monsieur Dupoisson, catching sight of her, peering through the banisters. Harry Fish, said Tallulah, and ran downstairs. What's this? Said Mr. Machette sharply. You know each other? What's all this Harry Fish bit? I thought your name was, Dupoisson. Oh, yes, said Harry Fish. When in France, you know, I see. So she is, so to speak, an assistant of yours. Well, put it this way, we've worked together before, very successfully. Harry Fish gave Tallulah a wink. In fact, Tallulah's previous experience of Harry Fish had been far from satisfactory. But that is another story. In her present strange predicament, she felt almost pleased to see him. Mr. Machette gave a sudden snort of laughter and patted the still shivering Mr. Fish on the back. "Ha, ha! Ah, brilliant, he said. Yes, I have to hand it to you. You take top marks for originality. Having your assistant arrive in a hamper, indeed." He gave another short laugh. "I'm going to grab another 40 winks while you get yourself dry. Come on, Nellie. I'm sure they'll have a lot to talk about. See you both at breakfast." "Harry," said Tallulah as soon as the door had shut behind them, "what are you up to now?" Listen. This could be my big break. Machette's a very powerful man. If I do well for him, he'll see me all right. I say, I thought I'd ruined my chances when I landed up in the duck pond just now. But you saved the day, Tallulah. He's impressed that I have an assistant. So you must help me, for old time's sake." Tallulah gave a sigh. "All right. I'd better help you to get off to a good start. But whatever happens, I must be on the night sleeper to London this evening. But if I'm your assistant, what am I meant to be assisting you with? I don't know the first thing about farming." "Farming? Oh, not a farmer. More in the property game. That line of country." "I see. What does Mr. Machette want with you?" Harry Fish looked uneasily out of the corner of his eye.
Well, he's interested in buying up some more land in this area. He wants my professional advice. This afternoon, for a start, I have an appointment at Blair Guffey Castle. You know, to see what the possibilities are.
Oh, said Tallulah. I've never been in a castle. Perhaps we'll meet the Duke.
I doubt it,
said Harry Fish. At 2 o'clock, a van, driven by Crowther wearing his flat cap once again, presented itself at the farmhouse door. Beside him sat the boy, picking moodily at his face. Neither seemed eager for conversation. Tallulah and Harry Fish jumped in the back, and they were soon off down the snowy country lanes. After half an hour's drive, Crowther suddenly swung the van off the road and parked in the shadow of a tall yew hedge. Tallulah wiped the steamy back window with a paw. Where are we? I don't see any castle.
I thought a little walk might do us good.
Harry Fish opened the door and jumped out.
Don't forget these,
said Crowther, handing him a small black attache case. Harry patted it fondly.
Tools of the trade,
he said. Crowther consulted his watch.
We'll give you half an hour.
Righto, fellas. Harry Fish walked a few yards down the road with Tallulah. Let's take a shortcut, he said suddenly, and jumped nimbly through a gap in the hedge. Tallulah found herself in the magnificently kept grounds of Blair Guffey Castle. On some rising ground on the far side of a frozen lake stood the ancient buildings themselves. Oh, well, I never, gasped Tallulah. Is Mr. Machette really going to buy all this?
Well, it all depends on my report, said Harry Fish. Just follow me.
He ran ahead, darting from bush to bush, almost as if he were playing hide and seek. What are you doing, Harry?
Some fine shrubs here. Keep your voice down, he whispered. We don't want to frighten the grouse.
They finally arrived at a large rhododendron bush immediately opposite the massive front door of the castle. It doesn't say it's for sale, remarked Tallulah. There's no boards outside. Harry Fish was rummaging in his pockets.
Oh, stupid of me. I seem to have left the keys behind.
Couldn't we ring the front doorbell?
No,
said Harry Fish quickly.
There's no one there.
Oh, well, that's that then. We'll just have to go back, and you can drop me off at the station on the way. A crafty look came over Harry Fish's face.
No, we can't do that. I can't bungle my first job.
He glanced upwards.
You see that open window on the second floor? Well, I'll just shin up the creeper and hop in that way. Easy as pie. You wait here, and I'll have my survey done in 2 shakes of a cat's tail.
Harry, began Tallulah, but he was already off, scrambling up the ivy-covered wall, the black attache case held in one paw. All went well at first, but then, when he was some 20 feet from the ground, he suddenly stopped and looked down at Tallulah.
I think I've lost my head for heights.
Hang on, Harry, I'm coming, cried Tallulah. But it was too late. Harry Fish and his attache case had fallen with a dreadful crash right through a glass cloche, guarding some tomato seedlings in the flower bed below. With some help from Tallulah, he was soon extricated from the debris, bruised and shaken, but otherwise none the worse for his accident. That settles it, said Tallulah. We must get back to the van.
Harry Fish looked at her pleadingly. "Oh, you promised you'd help me, Tallulah. Look, you go up for me. Then you can let me in the front door." "Well, I really don't know that You promised." It had been a long time since Tallulah had done any climbing worth mentioning, but she soon found herself at the second-floor window. She waved a paw at Harry Fish and disappeared inside. Tallulah gazed around her. Somewhere downstairs, a grandfather clock struck 3. "I must hurry." Tallulah ran out of the door and through room after room, each furnished more splendidly than the one before. She reached a curved stone staircase with suits of armor standing on every other step. She ran down to the first floor and peeped in at the enormous mirrored ballroom, hung with glittering chandeliers. "Mrs. Girdlestone's going to have her work cut out keeping this place clean," she thought. She jumped down the remaining stairs and found herself at the great wooden front door. "Oh, well done, Tallulah," said Harry Fish, hurrying in with his black case. "I'm half frozen." He opened the lid and took out a plan of the castle. Then he drew on a pair of white cotton gloves and prodded the plan. "There we are," he said. "You just hang on here. I won't be 2 seconds." It was getting dark and decidedly chilly in the great hall of the castle, and Tallulah, who had read several ghost stories, almost fancied she saw one of the suits of armor move in the gathering twilight. When some time had passed and Harry had not returned, Tallulah decided to set out in search of him. She found him in one of the smaller studies, crouching in front of an open wall safe. "Oh, there you are," she said. Oh, cried Harry Fish, spinning round and almost dropping an enormous diamond necklace he had been examining. Oh, you did give me a fright." "Aren't they beautiful? Real diamonds. But they must be heavy to wear. What are you doing with them?" Just checking that everything's in order. Now, don't disturb me, there's a good girl. I won't be a jiffy. Run along, run along."
Tallulah wandered off and rather absent-mindedly began investigating a curiously low door on the far side of the room. As she turned the knob, she was nearly knocked flying as 3 snarling bulldogs burst in. "Run for your life!" cried Harry Fish. The 3 huge animals pounded after them down the stone staircase, knocking suits of armor flying. On they sped, out through the front door, past the rhododendron bushes, and round the frozen lake. They're gaining on us! They're gaining on us!" panted Harry Fish, who hadn't run so fast in years. They reached the hedge, but by now it was too dark to find the gap. "Oh, we're done for!" wailed Harry Fish. "Quick, up this elm tree!" shouted Tallulah, and without pausing to look behind them, they scampered up the trunk. From the topmost branch, Harry Fish looked down at the baying dogs. "I feel another of my dizzy spells coming on. Oh, dear, I think I'm going to fall." And he did. Luckily, he bounced off the yew hedge and landed in a heap at the feet of Croaker and the boy, who had been lurking in the shadows.
"It's been over an hour. Here, where's the stuff?"
hissed Croaker.
"It's a complicated story," said Harry Fish miserably.
The boy sniggered.
"I'm sure the boss will want to hear it."
journey back in the van was grim and silent. As they passed a small railway station, Tallulah said, "Do you think I could be let out here? Please?" But Croaker, his mouth set in a firm line and his huge body hunched over the wheel, drove on. Harry Fish was no more communicative. He would only shake his head and mutter, "Now we're really for the high jump." Tallulah's anxieties increased when she found herself being bundled roughly from the van by the boy, while Croaker frog-marched Harry Fish through the front door of the farmhouse. Inside, Nellie Girdlestone was chopping vegetables with the carving knife. Mr. Machette, in a grey chalk-striped suit, was seated at the kitchen table, smoking a cigarette. The boy shut the door, and he and Croaker stood in front of it. "Well, I'll be on my way," said Tallulah brightly. "You keep your mouth shut," growled Croaker ferociously. Mr. Machette slowly blew out a stream of cigarette smoke and studied Harry Fish, who was nervously tugging at a whisker. "I gather you haven't had a very profitable afternoon, Monsieur du Poisson, or Fish, or whatever your name is."
Well, one of those days, you know,
mumbled Harry Fish wretchedly. "What exactly went wrong?"
Oh, just a bit of bad luck.
Mr. Machette smiled icily and ground out his cigarette. "I don't have unlucky people around me, Mr. Fish. Besides, I had heard that you were a very lucky person. In fact, the top jewel thief on the French Riviera." "What?" cried Tallulah in astonishment. "Oh, come on, little lady, don't play the innocent with me. Your friend here is wanted by the police of 5 continents. I decide to try him out on a small local job, and he fumbles it, which is most regrettable for you both." He waved a limp hand. "Take them upstairs." A few moments later, Tallulah and Harry Fish found themselves thrown onto the floor of a dark attic, and the trapdoor was slammed shut. "Harry, I don't know what to say. You, a dangerous criminal?"
No, well, I'm not, am I? It's all a bit of a mix-up. In fact, with my head, I'd make a rotten burglar, as you saw this afternoon.
"But, Harry, you told me..."
"Yes, I know what I told you. What could I say when I found you here? You see, Tallulah, since we last met, times haven't been too good. Well, you've probably read in the papers recently about all these big jewel robberies. It may surprise you to learn that our friend, Mr. Machette, downstairs, is the mastermind behind the whole operation."
"No," gasped Tallulah. "I thought there was something funny. They didn't seem like farmers."
So I said to myself, Harry Fish, you can do yourself a bit of good. And I invented this Du Poisson character. Well, it nearly worked, didn't it?
"Oh, Harry, what a mess you've got us into now." Tallulah thought for a moment. Then she said decisively, "There's no point in being sorry for ourselves. Let's see if we can get out of here." She felt along the wooden beams in the dark. "Oh, it all seems pretty solid. Wait a minute."
What's that? What have you found?
"There's a loose slate here. If you give me a hand, we might manage to shift it and get out onto the roof." Together they pulled and heaved until the slate broke loose and fell into the yard, where it smashed into smithereens. "Quick," said Tallulah. "They may have heard that." She squeezed through and pulled Harry Fish after her, and together they scrambled down the steeply sloping roof to a parapet. Harry Fish suddenly stopped and gave a shudder.
Oh, no, said Tallulah. Not again. It's no good. Oh, you'll have to leave me here.
Don't be so silly. Look, there's a drain pipe. You'll be down before you know it. But there was still some way to go when Harry Fish lost his nerve and his grip at the same time. As he fell backwards, Tallulah stretched out a paw to try and catch him. He grasped wildly at it, and together they tumbled to the ground. Several things happened at once. Harry Fish cried out in pain, "My leg! Oh, my poor leg!" A torch snapped on, and Tallulah, who had landed without a scratch, looked up into the stern face of a policeman. The door of the farmhouse opened, and Nellie Girdlestone peered out.
"Oh, Lord preserve us!" she shrieked. "It's the police!"
The policeman picked Harry Fish and Tallulah up by the scruff of their necks and carried them one under each arm into the kitchen, where Nellie Girdlestone was cowering behind the table, and Mr. Machette, in striped pyjamas, was feverishly struggling to pull a heavy suitcase from the cupboard. Despite her fright, Tallulah couldn't help noticing that he was completely bald. His fine iron grey hair must have been a wig. "Excuse me, sir." The policeman gave a small cough. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I thought you'd like to know I caught these cat burglars in the act of trying to break into the house." Mr. Machette seemed suddenly relieved. He shoved the suitcase back into the cupboard.
"But, officer, you know about me," cried Tallulah. "The boy brought you a message."
"Boy? What boy? Do you have a boy, sir?" "No, of course not," said Mr. Machette. "There's just me and my elderly housekeeper." The constable nodded. "Aye. Well, you know, this sort of crime is on the increase at the moment. In fact, only this afternoon some thieves broke into Blair Guffey Castle. Fortunately, the guard dogs scared them off." Mr. Machette looked at the two cats dangling in the grip of the policeman. "Yes, they seem a real pair of villains. Good work, officer." Tallulah wriggled.
"But," she began,
"He's the real—" "I must warn you," broke in the constable, "that anything you say will be taken down in evidence and may be used against you." The superintendent at the local police station was half asleep behind his desk. "Oh, what's this? More drunken drivers?" "No, Super," said the constable proudly. "I've just picked up two of the most wanted criminals in the country." The superintendent gasped. "Not the—" "Yes. It's the Cat Burglar gang." "Good heavens. What are we to do with them? We've never had any real criminals here before." The superintendent scratched his head. "We'll just have to take instructions from New Scotland Yard first thing in the morning. And meanwhile, constable, just put them in the lockup. Keep a very close eye on them. This could mean promotion, you know, for us both." The lockup cell was a damp barn, filled with all kinds of unfortunate people. Mostly those who had drunk too much over Christmas, and others who, sadly, had nowhere better to go. As Tallulah and Harry Fish were marched in, it seemed almost as though there were some sort of party in progress. Space was quickly made for them, and as they sat down on one of the hard benches, an old man with a bulbous red nose said, "We're playing games to cheer ourselves up. Everybody has to do a turn."
The lady has a very fine voice,"
put in Harry Fish quickly, and everybody clamoured for a song. Tallulah smiled and looked round the low barn.
"All right," she said. "Since this isn't the place, I suppose any of us would choose to spend the holidays."
When life takes a downward plunge when days seemed dark and gloomy. A song my mother used to sing reminds me to feel better. It could be worse. It could be worse. You could really have reason for crying. Though things may look bad, remember this, though it's not bliss, it could be worse. You say that you're unlucky and that nothing goes your way, and your life's a dismal story of defeat. At least you're not on board a boat that's sinking in a storm with hungry sharks all eager queuing for a treat. That would be worse. Oh, so much worse. Then you'd really have reason for crying. Though things may look grim, well, never mind. When life's unkind, it could be worse. You say you haven't got the means to make it in the world, and you never learn to land up on your feet. Well, you could be jumping from a plane. You pull the ripcord, but in vain. You left your parachute back on the seat. That would be worse. Oh, much, much worse. Then you'd really have reason for crying. Though things may look rough, take my advice, though it's not nice, it could be worse. You say that you are lonely and so far away from home. You spend your hours in tears and misery. At least you're not bound hand and foot, held captive by some cannibals who look on you as something for their tea. That would be worse. A whole lot worse. Then you'd really have reason for crying. Though things may look bad, remember this, though it's not bliss, it could be worse. Though things may look grim, well, never mind. When life's unkind, it could be worse.
Early the next morning, after an uncomfortable night, Tallulah and Harry Fish made a brief appearance in the local magistrate's court, standing together on a chair in the dock. The policeman read a statement from his notebook.
Do you have any means of identification?
Asked the clerk of the court. No, said Tallulah. But let me explain.
Thank you, said the magistrate. Remand them in custody. Next.
Outside the courtroom, some newspaper reporters and a television cameraman had assembled. Tallulah smiled and waved.
There's no time for that,
said the constable, and pushed the pair of them into the back of a waiting Black Maria. Accompanied by a motorcycle escort with sirens wailing, they headed southwards. I simply don't believe it, exclaimed Mr. Wise. He lowered his Daily Globe and looked across the breakfast table at his wife and Peter. Tallulah has been arrested. Oh, that's not possible, said Peter. Well, I knew something had happened, said his mother. Her not turning up like that. Mr. Wise read aloud from the paper. Under heavy guard, the two suspects, Tallulah and Mr. H. Fish, Peter groaned. Oh, not him again. Have been placed in the maximum security wing of Grangemore Prison. What's the charge, dear? asked Mrs. Wise. Mr. Wise shook his head. I'm afraid it looks very bad for them. They're accused of being members of the Cat Burglar gang. The two household cats, Roger and Beatrice, looked at each other in horror. Oh, Dad, we must go and see her at once. Hold your horses. No, we don't know the full facts yet. Mr. Wise thought for a moment. I suppose the least I can do is to arrange for her to have a good lawyer. Gridley's the man. I'll get on to him at once. When Tallulah and Harry Fish had arrived at Grangemore Prison, they were thoroughly searched. Even Tallulah's bracelet from the toy department of Hamble and Borringe was taken from her and carefully noted. They were both issued with sombre grey prison clothes and placed in adjoining cells in a wing that was patrolled night and day by relays of warders with Alsatian dogs. "It could be worse, I suppose," called Tallulah to Harry Fish through the ventilation grill. "Could it?" "Well, at least it's clean." Tallulah ran a paw approvingly along the bars of the small window. A panel in the cell door slid back, and an eye looked in. "You've got visitors, miss," said the warder. The heavy iron doors swung open, and in rushed Peter, followed by Mr. Wise and a distinguished-looking man in a black overcoat. "Oh, Peter, I'm so sorry about Christmas." Tears welled into Tallulah's eyes. "You never got my message? Or the hamper?" "We'd better get down to business," said Mr. Wise briskly. "We haven't got much time. May I introduce Mr. Gridley of Messrs. Gridley, Gridley and Gridley. Now, he will be representing you at the trial. I want you to tell him exactly what happened." The days passed very slowly. Just before New Year, Tallulah received another visitor. It was a nun, Sister Agnes. "Oh, my dear child, and how are we today?" She sat down on the narrow bed. "I'm all right. Thank you, sister." "Well, I have a small request," said Sister Agnes, her eyes twinkling. "I hear you have some sort of a voice, and we are organizing a New Year's Eve concert for all the prisoners for tomorrow evening. Now, we'd be very pleased if you'd give us a little song." "I'm not sure that I'm in a singing mood," said Tallulah. "Oh, come on now. Just think how much it'll mean to all the others." "You will do it, won't you, Tallulah?" called Harry Fish after Sister Agnes had left. "I don't know." "Go on. You'll be a whopping success." "Hey, I've just remembered something." "Yes?" "Wapping. That's where they're sailing from. Wapping. You know, Wapping on the Thames. The whole gang. On New Year's Day. That's what Machette said. He's moving everything to the continent. That's why he was interested in me." "Shh. Keep your voice down." "Are you sure?" "Course I am. And there was the, name of a boat. Something to do with Scotland. Heather Queen, was it? No. Tartan Lady. Tartan Lady. That was it." Tallulah smiled to herself. "Do you know, Harry, I think I may sing in the concert, after all." The dining hall at Grangemore Prison had been festooned with balloons and streamers, and all the inmates were seated in rows facing a low stage. But although it had the appearance of a happy occasion, there were 2 officers stationed at every door. The concert was well underway. There had been a conjurer, 2 acrobats, and now a warder was revealing himself to be a surprisingly good ventriloquist. Harry Fish and Tallulah were waiting in the wings. Tallulah was wearing a simple but attractive evening dress, which Sister Agnes had persuaded the prison seamstress to run up on her sewing machine.
Ah, just like old times, eh?
Said Harry Fish.
Tallulah, love, are you sure you know what you're doing? If it wasn't for my bad leg...
Tallulah smiled calmly. It's quite all right, Harry. You know what you have to do. Sister Agnes appeared behind them.
Oh, my goodness, will that man never be done?
The ventriloquist eventually came off stage to great applause, and Sister Agnes made her announcement.
And now, from a young lady, a very pretty little song. I want you to give a big welcome to Miss Tallulah.
When you're away, thinking of home, all that you've left far behind you, faces you know from long ago, crowd into your mind and make you sad. Trying to smile, thinking of home and of the miles that divide you. How sweet it seems in your daydreams, thinking of the way it was back home. I don't long for castles or for palaces, just my own front door. A house where warmth and life and happiness is. Who could ask for more?
There was a sudden, tremendous disturbance in one of the aisles. Harry Fish was waving wildly and yelling out loud. When the warders rushed up to restrain him, he made off as fast as he could on his bad leg, hobbling in and out of the rows of prisoners who cheered and stamped their feet. When order had been restored, and Harry Fish had been led off, still shouting, under guard to solitary confinement, attention was once again focused on the stage. But there was no Tallulah. It was almost a quarter of an hour before a small open window was discovered, carefully hidden by the folds of the stage curtain.
So far, so good,
Thought Tallulah to herself, as she perched on a turret of Grangemore prison and surveyed the street below. But the quiet of the evening was abruptly shattered by the clanging of alarm bells, and blinding searchlights began to sweep the prison walls and yard. As luck would have it, at that very moment, a lorry turned the corner of the street, laden with full baskets of fresh herring from the coast.
Oh, well, it's now or never,
thought Tallulah, and she jumped, her fluffy tail billowing out behind her like a parachute. Billingsgate, the main fish market of London, was already springing into life when the lorry, with R. Pattingale, fish carriers, painted on the side, turned left past the monument and drew to a halt in Lower Thames Street. Tallulah had dozed off for an hour or so, with the sweet smell of herring in her nostrils. But now she woke with a jolt and looked around her. Where am I? She wondered. Then she heard the cries of the fish porters, and a kitten memory returned. I know this place, she thought. It had been long ago, when she was a homeless stray, singing for her supper. She jumped down from the tailboard and stretched herself. If this is Billingsgate, then Wapping's only a couple of miles away. There's still a few hours before they sail. She trotted purposefully eastwards along the dark streets that bordered the river. It was a cold, windy evening, and the Tower of London and Tower Bridge stood out clearly in the light of the full moon. The tide was still coming in, and was lapping noisily against the river walls, and on it the occasional tug, which hooted mournfully as it pulled its string of barges upriver. By now, Tallulah's legs were feeling a little weary, and she remembered that she had not eaten since lunchtime. Ahead, reflected in the fast-flowing water, were the bright lights of a pub, and she caught the sounds of music and laughter and the smell of cooking. The Waterville Arms, read a sign in green and orange light bulbs, and below it a poster proclaimed, New Year's Eve Talent Contest, cash prizes galore, all welcome. My second performance today, thought Tallulah. I hope my luck holds out. Inside, the pub was warm and cheerful, and packed with a friendly crowd waiting to see in the new year. Right in. Do we have any more contestants? Boomed the compere into his microphone. Step up now. Don't be shy, don't be shy. It's your last chance, you know. Tallulah struggled through the throng, and the compere helped her onto the stage. Well, 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 here's a little lady. Come on, give her a hand. She's going to try her luck with the boys in the band. Give her a key, someone, will you?
Catchy tune. Play me a rhythm, and I'll be up there with them, and I'm moving to the music of the band. I love to hear a banjo strumming. I love a piano's ragged time. Let them start drumming. I'm on my feet and running, and I'm moving to the music of the band. Moving to the music of the band. No matter what I may be doing, no matter where I chance to be, the cymbals start crashing. In a flash I'm dashing to be moving to the music of the band. Oh yes I am moving to the music of the band. I like sweet voices singing, and I like the symphony. But most of all, when a band starts playing, well, that's the sound for me. Give me a bass that's really jumping. Give me a guitar taking lead. Add some percussion, and you'll see me rushing to be moving to the music of the band. Moving to the music of the band. Say it one more time. I'm moving to the music of the band.
Upstairs in his snug parlour, Mr. Brown, the proprietor of the Waterville Arms, was watching the end of news at 10. And here is a late news flash. One of the suspects in the Cat Burglar robberies escaped earlier this evening from the maximum security wing at Grangemore Prison.
a picture of Tallulah was flashed onto the screen. A nationwide hunt has been launched, and police are watching all ports and airports. The New Scotland Yard this evening issued a warning to the public that she may be dangerous. Mr. Brown switched off the television and called to his wife, "Come on, dear, let's go down and see the new year in." As he entered the bar, the compere caught sight of him. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce mine host, Mr. Brown, just in time to present first prize to this charming young songstress." Mr. Brown stared at Tallulah. "Here, I've just seen her on the news. She's a wanted criminal. After her. But be careful." There was pandemonium in the pub. The compere tried to catch hold of Tallulah's tail, but she was too quick for him. Mr. Brown started to chase her, but she tripped him neatly with the microphone cable, sending him sprawling on the floor. She gave a leap onto a hanging ship's lantern, which swung alarmingly over the upturned heads of the crowd, and then fell with a crash onto the bar, fusing all the lights. And a drunken couple in one corner thought it was midnight and started to sing Auld Lang Syne. In the confusion, Tallulah managed to dart through an open doorway and down a corridor into the ladies' lavatory. Here there was an open skylight, through which Tallulah, with one last great leap, made her escape. By now, a damp mist was rolling in from the river, and Tallulah made her way along the wharves, past giant cranes and gloomy warehouses. Ahead, by some steps, she could just make out the looming bulk of a large vessel, moving gently on the turning tide. The paint on the bows was cracked and faded, but Tallulah had little difficulty in making out the name. Tartan Lady. "This is it," she thought. "I mustn't put a paw wrong." Through a low porthole, she caught sight of Nellie Girdlestone in the galley, stirring a vat of boiling porridge, and the boy, in a white chef's hat, moodily scraping some carrots. Tallulah inched forward, and through the next porthole she spotted Croker, sweating under his cap as he nailed down the lid of a wooden packing case. Through other portholes, she saw numbers of faces she didn't recognize. "I never dreamt the gang was this big," she thought. Then an amazing sight met her gaze. In what, to judge from its size and its luxurious fittings, must be the captain's cabin, she observed Mr. Machette struggling into a flowing red evening gown and forcing a blonde lady's wig over his bald head. "How very strange," she said to herself. She looked up and down. At the other end of Wapping Pier stood a telephone box. Tallulah hurried over to it and dialed 999. "I want the police," she said. "Put me through to New Scotland Yard." Within seconds, she was connected to Chief Inspector Sterling, the detective in charge of the cat burglary investigations. "My name is Tallulah," she announced in a firm voice. "I think you may be looking for me." When she had put the phone down, Tallulah paused for a moment's thought. Then, with a determined expression, she returned to the tartan lady and climbed the gangway. The boy was the first to catch sight of her, as he slouched across the deck, carrying a bottle of champagne and some glasses for Mr. Machette. "Oh, well," cried Tallulah gaily, "if it isn't my old friend, I couldn't possibly let you go without saying goodbye." The door of the captain's cabin flew open, and the blonde Mr. Machette looked out. "Who's that? What's going on?"
"Good evening," said Tallulah politely. I didn't know you were holding a fancy dress ball."
"Get that cat!" screamed Mr. Machette, his face purple with rage. Within seconds, the decks were swarming with the most appalling selection of thugs and villains, who surrounded Tallulah, grabbed hold of her, threw her roughly into the cabin, and tied her to the brass bedstead. "You've caused me enough trouble," said Mr. Machette, going to the bureau and taking out a pocket automatic pistol. "I can't have you spoiling things now." He pointed the pistol at Tallulah, who made no sound. As he was about to pull the trigger, the cabin door burst open, and in dashed a dozen uniformed policemen, led by Detective Inspector Sterling. "Here she is! Seize her!" he ordered his men. "One moment," said Tallulah. "Before you arrest me, just ask yourselves why I'm tied up like this, and why that woman is aiming a gun at me. Well, you might like to know that she's not really a woman at all, but Mr. Machette, chief of the whole Cat Burglar organization. You'll find the rest of the gang on board. They're planning to move their operation to the continent in a few hours. And if you don't believe me, then, well, open some of those packing cases." A policeman prized up the lid of a tea chest that stood in one corner. "Here, have a look at this, sir," he said, as he scooped out a handful of diamond brooches. "Stand back, all of you," snarled Mr. Machette suddenly, snatching off his wig and swinging the pistol from left to right. "Don't make a move, unless you want it to be your last." He strode to the door, but his high heels caught in the hem of the long red dress, and he pitched to the floor, the pistol flying from his grasp to be neatly caught by Detective Inspector Sterling. "Thank you," he said. "I'll take care of this." He turned to his men. "Now go and pick up the rest." It was a most glorious June day, with the merest hint of a breeze. Tallulah slipped her latchkey under the stone frog, adjusted her wide-brimmed picture hat upon her head, and walked down the garden path, past the flowering rose bushes and the marigold borders, humming with bees. Outside the gate, and all the way to Lower Mumford Station, there were crowds of well-wishers. On the platform itself, the village band was assembled, and a banner had been strung across the tracks, proclaiming, "Well done, Tallulah." The station master helped her into her carriage, and the band struck up a stirring march. "Well, it isn't every day we have someone from the village receiving a medal from the Queen." The train rolled through the smiling countryside. "I can't wait to see Peter and the family again," Tallulah was thinking, "only this time in much more agreeable surroundings. I think I'll let them have the medal. After all, they never did get that Christmas hamper." She removed her lace gloves and fanned her face with a paw. What a strange business it had been. But luckily it had all turned out well in the end. Even poor Harry Fish was soon to be released from Grangemore, thanks to the expert defence of Mr. Gridley, the lawyer. The train rattled past Battersea Power Station and across Vauxhall Bridge. Tallulah looked downriver towards the docks. "Oh, but I am glad it's all over." At Victoria, there were even larger crowds, and swarms of reporters and photographers at the barrier. Every newspaper placard carried the words, Tallulah in birthday honours list. A taxi was waiting. The cabbie jumped out and held open the door. "Hello, miss. Remember me? Do you want me to take you to Amble and Borringe?" Tallulah gave a little shudder. "Oh, not today, thank you. Buckingham Palace, please."